All right, well, let's begin. Greetings, everyone. I'm Leea Litzgus. I'm the Executive Director for the Indigenous Centre for Cumulative Effects, or fondly known as ICE. I know it's morning and afternoon for many different people across the country, and I'm coming to you today from a rainy Toronto, traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Haudenosaunee, the Métis. And I'd also like to recognize the traditional territory of where the ICE head office is of the Algonquin. And I'm really pleased to be with you here today to give you an introduction to the center and talk to you a bit about how we came to be, what we've been up to for the last almost year now, and what we have planned for the future. But first, what are cumulative effects? Some of you may be familiar with the term cumulative effects. The definition that you have on the screen from the Canadian Council of Ministers of the Environment is the one that we often see quoted. But many Indigenous communities find that this definition is a bit too narrow because it tends to focus on the biophysical and doesn't take into account, the socioeconomic, the cultural, the health impacts of these activities in our communities, which, as you know, are very important to us. And so some Indigenous communities, a couple of Indigenous communities, realizing that the Canadian definition was a little too narrow, have took it upon themselves to bring more of an Indigenous perspective to the definition. And here we have two on the screen, one from the Mashteuiatsh First Nation in British Columbia, and one from the Nunavut Inuit Review Board up north. But I think that you'll see that this is a broader perspective on cumulative effects and is more in keeping with how we as Indigenous people view the environment. And why does this matter to our communities? Well, as you're well aware, our communities are facing accumulating impact of intensive resource extraction projects in our territories and increasing demands for new projects. And these are altering the socioeconomic environments where we live. And then there's the combined effect of all of these activities, which is degrading the vital ecosystems that our economies and our communities rely on. And also, the impact assessment legislation from the federal government has also been changed to include cumulative effects. And so it's now part of the regulatory environment where more and more communities involved in. So we want to be best prepared to be able to, address some of those cumulative effects and make sure that proponents developing in our territories understand what cumulative effects is about and what it means to us. So I think there was a need across the country for some supports to Indigenous communities with respect to cumulative effects. We have all this traditional and Indigenous knowledge, but how does it fit into this sort of new term, cumulative effects? And it's a new term by the federal government, although we've been practicing and seeing it for hundreds of years. So there was 6 roundtables that were formed, and they led the groundwork for a group to come together to see how we can best support Indigenous communities. And in 2018, there was a multi-stakeholder group formed, and this group met across the country to discuss the best way to support Indigenous communities. We did invite the national Indigenous organizations to participate in these roundtables, but they were too busy at the time in 2018 and early 19 to participate. So this slide here just gives you a bit of an overview of the evolution of the Indigenous Centre for Cumulative Effects. So as I mentioned, back in 2018, early 2019, there was a group of Indigenous and non-Indigenous cumulative effect practitioners that were supported through the Indigenous Services Canada, who acted as a secretariat. And they held roundtables across the country. And you'll see the different locations at the bottom of the screen. And as a result of these discussions, the idea of an Indigenous-led Centre on Cumulative Effects was formed. The Government of Canada was able to secure $15 million over 5 years to co-develop the centre. Then in 2019, there was an interim board of directors that was established, and ICE was incorporated as a not-for-profit organization. And all the work that had been happening prior to February 2020 led to the first Indigenous Forum on Cumulative Effects. And this forum, as you see, took place in February 2020, just before our whole world changed and we were rocked by the global pandemic. So luckily, we're really fortunate that the forum was able to take place. And it was really, really helpful in bringing all of these communities. There was over 300 people participating from 140 communities across the country. It was at the forum that the centre really started to take shape, and it provided an opportunity to validate the work of the roundtables, and it provided an opportunity for communities to come together and share best practices that they've been doing in the area of cumulative effects, and also to provide some guidance to the development of the centre. And you'll see this graphic recording. These recordings, I think, are so beautiful, and they were used at the forum to capture the ideas of the participants and to identify values that were important and areas they wanted the centre to focus on. And some of those ideas come through here. Obviously, building capacity was really at the center of what they wanted, what they wanted ICE to focus on. They wanted the concept of two-eyed seeing, Indigenous knowledge and Western science, and to use those in a complementary way. The importance of relationships between our people in our communities, and amongst communities and across the country. Sustainability was important, sustainable communities, as well as the underlying principle of self-determination, which needs to be grounded in all the work that we are doing. Some of the other results of the forum, you're able to develop a vision for ICE, as well as the mission. And the vision is that Indigenous people have the capacity and the ability to assess, monitor, and manage cumulative effects occurring in our lands, waters, and communities. And then you'll see our mission there is to create this network that allows communities to share and to engage better in cumulative effects work and support one another. So the forum was also instrumental in developing the guiding principles that they wanted the centre to operate under. And you'll see on the screen here that it be an Indigenous-led center. And this should be reflected by an Indigenous board of directors, an Indigenous executive director, that the center be non-partisan, non-political, and not for profit. And it was really important that it be independent of government and be housed outside of government. And then, as I briefly talked about in the last slide, excuse me, that it be guided by the principle of Etua Patamak. And I apologize to the Mi'kmaq out there. I'm never sure if I'm saying that right, but the easy way for me to say is two-eyed seeing, which is seeing from one eye with the strength of Indigenous knowledge and way of knowing, and with the other with the strength of Western knowledge and way of knowing. And this, of course, is from the Mi'kmaq elder Albert Marshall. And it was also important to the center that it includes youth and elders. And so at the forum, they also talked about what kind of activities the centers would focus on, how would we support communities. So you'll have a range of activities here. The primary objective of ICE is to help and build and enhance the technical and scientific capacity of Indigenous communities to manage and monitor cumulative effects. And that ICE be a network for communities to access information and resources, to share best practices, and to act as mentors and learn from one another in our communities. And the center, we're taking this seriously, and we're engaging and reporting out to communities in ways that best suits the needs and ways that communities want to hear from us. How will the center be governed? The center is governed by an Indigenous board of directors and an executive director and a technical advisory committee. The goal of the center is to have representation from all 13 regions of the country. It's easier said than done sometimes. We currently have 9 regions of the country represented, from British Columbia, Alberta, Ontario, Nova Scotia, Northwest Territories, Yukon, and Nunavut. So we're getting there. And if you're from one of these unrepresented areas and interested in getting involved in ICE, please don't hesitate to get in touch with myself or the center directly or via the website. And yes, we will continue the recruiting process as we evolve into ICE. We have the Technical Advisory Committee, which was just formed and started their work in January of 2021. And it's a mix of Indigenous and non-Indigenous cumulative effects experts, practitioners, and it advises the center on the technical work that we want to do and what are the best resources, and guiding us in a good way in keeping with the principle of cumulative effects. And as I mentioned, we have the Technical Advisory Committee, but we also will be developing or creating other advisory committees to advise our work. For example, Youth Committee, Elders Committee, and there could be others as we go through in the evolution of ICE. So what has ICE been up to? So as I mentioned, it was first incorporated in November 2019. We had the first forum in February 2020. And I joined the center just in June 2020 as the executive director, I guess the first executive director. There was no executive director prior to that. So since that time, since about June of 2020, we've been, slowly plugging away and making headway. We launched our website. which if you haven't visited, I hope that you take the opportunity to visit. This is how we share information with the community. We launched, where we created the community funding program, which is a funding support program to assist communities undertaking cumulative effects work at various levels, from just starting out, and those are already involved. And we launched the first call out for proposals under that program in February. We recruited more board members. We held our first strategic planning session. And we funded and just completed an Indigenous consulting group to create an inventory of all of the cumulative effects work going on across the country. And that work has just been completed, and we have really good results, and we're looking forward to sharing that with people and sharing it on our website. But it's a wealth of good information, and help people who are trying to get involved in cumulative effects to know where some of that work's done and what's been done before. And also we held our first virtual conference, and many things are virtual, like this. I guess you probably thought you might be in person, but here we are. And we held our first conference this past March, and pleased to say that we had over 200 registrants. So for a new organization, I thought it was a pretty good success. We felt good about that as an ICE team and an ICE board. I should say we're just a small team at ICE, with myself as executive director, and Paul-Antoine, who will be presenting after me. He's our technical advisory and policy advisor for the center, and he's also been with the center since before it was a center, in the early days of the roundtables. We have an association management group, so we have one person from that who's providing all the backroom services for an organization. And we have three contractors. So we're at about 4 full-time FTEs. So it's a small group, but I like to say small and mighty, but we're growing, and it hasn't stopped the progress. And so this is what we have planned for the near future of ICE. We will finalize our 3-year plan as agreed to by the board. And this will guide us for the short and medium term. We're in the process of developing more resources. As I talked about, the work on the inventory of cumulative effects, we're looking at taking that, creating a database, an interactive map that communities can come and access. We're also hoping that we'd host regional workshops and actually be able to do it in person. Because there's some parts of the country we're finding that are more involved in cumulative effects work and have been doing it longer than other parts. So really trying to reach out to some of those areas, and develop webinars for those times when we can't get together in person. And we're going to host another national conference in 2022. We'd like to be in person, but it may be virtual again, but we'll see. I guess people get vaccinated, and see where we go from there. And I'd just like to leave you with this last slide, which is another graphic recording from the forum that was held February 2020. And I just think it's a nice vision of the possibilities for ICE and how we want to work together and work with communities. And we are just started our volunteer community, and always looking for feedback from community members. So if you're interested in getting involved in ICE as a board member, on one of the advisory committees, or being a volunteer, please just contact myself directly or go on the website. There's a place to sign up there. We're always looking to broaden our ICE community. So with that, I will close my presentation And happy to take questions now or wait until after Paul-Antoine's presentation. But I just want to say Chumigwech for your time today. It's been great to spend this time with you and introduce you to ICE. And Paul-Antoine is going to tell you a little about the work he's been doing in the area of cumulative effects for his PhD in working with 2 communities in northern Quebec. So without further ado, Paul-Antoine, I will turn it to you.
Thank you, Leea. So, bonjour tout le monde. Hi, everyone. I'm Paul-Antoine Cardin. I'm talking to you from Quebec City at a confluence of several Indigenous communities, traditional territories. As Leea mentioned, I would present to you today a part of my work, personal work on cumulative effects issues. So for a bit of context, I'm the technical advisor for ICE since July 2020, but I'm also been pursuing a PhD thesis at Laval University in Quebec since few years now, and I'm at the end of the process. So I would be presenting that work. So let me start with sharing my screen. So I might ask Leea if everything looks good.
Yeah, looks good, Paul.
Sorry, I couldn't find mute fast enough. There were too many things open on my screen. Apologies, Paul-Antoine.
Oh, no problem.
That's
Just wanted
great.
to make sure everyone was seeing my screen correctly. So, like I said, I'm Paul-Antoine Cardin. I want to acknowledge that a part of that work is being done with David Clary, which is an environmental advisor at Tikwakameenut-Tikwikan in Mashteuiatsh, which is the community I work with for that project. So I wanted to acknowledge his contribution to that presentation and to the work that we've been doing together. So to provide an idea of my presentation today, so I will show you an introduction to the community, where it is in Quebec, the objective of the research, the methodology I used, well, we decided to use together, an example of what would be the administrative assessment tool that we would develop based on cumulative effects, and then some reflection thoughts on how we could work on a partenarial research, some insight on how to work together. And then Leea and myself will be gladly taking questions if you have some. So also for context, I'm working with Mashteuiatsh First Nation, which is an Ilnu nation. It's based in the Lac-Saint-Jean region in Quebec. So it's one of the southernmost, with ICCCE First Nation, one of the southernmost Ilnu community. The community of Mashteuiatsh is by the Lac-Saint-Jean. It's been established by the name of Pointe Bleue in 1856, but changed its name in 1985 for Mashteuiatsh. It's around 7,000 members, and it covers mainly that point, which is why it was Pointe Bleue, into the lake. So this is the community, though there is a quite larger traditional territory, which is called Nitassinan. So Nitassinan would be what you see in orange, which goes from Lac-Saint-Jean region and goes north to Irish Mountains. What you see as the little green boundaries are family territories. And what you have in the yellow part in the south is the southeast territory, which is a shared territory with ICCCE and Pessamit First Nation. That is considered as being shared, and part of that is being shared with these communities. What I can also mention about the family territories is that it's also been a beaver reserve. So I won't go into that question. It could be long, but the family territories are also being parts of that beaver reserve. So with this in mind, with this big traditional territory in mind, the community had questions on cumulative effects and wanted to elaborate an administrative tool to help to assess cumulative effects of economic development taking place on the Tasman. It had two specific points at the beginning that they wanted to do. They wanted it to be able to encompass cultural practices and land occupancy of Pequagami, which are the Ilnu of Pequagami, Pequagami being the name of Lac-Saint-Jean, of the lake. So these cultural practices and this land occupancy as a name in Innu language, which is Ilnu Aitun. And they want also having that administrative tool being embedded in the day-to-day consultation process. So they wanted that tool to be effective on their regulatory process. But why a tool on cumulative effects? It started with the fact that you've seen the traditional territory, the ancestral territory is quite large. And one of the issues they had is recreational tourism, cottages and hunters and fisheries on the territory. And that a first cottage study gave seldom results. They tried a more quantitative approach and wanted a more qualitative approach to look at how the recreation and cottaging and all this kind of activities were having an impact. They were also receiving a lot of comments, well, in the consultation process, while they were talking about one aspect, one industries, people that were being interviewed or were consulted were talking about other industries that weren't into the line of what they were discussing. There's also context in Mashteuiatsh where they are under a treaty negotiation. So in 2004, they signed an agreement of principle. So they have quite a good consultation process and a framework. So they have a way of having a process in which they can introduce an administrative tool about cumulative effects. So they wanted more in theoretical point, wanted to see the relationship between the impacts of punctual and non-cumulative issues with each others. So this is a group of issues that they wanted to address as a whole instead of trying to work by industries. So this is then that you have an understanding that we have a quite large traditional territory. We have economic development on that territory, and there's a consultation process going on at each time you proponents comes to the band council and want to develop something. Then what would be the good way for land management at the council to understand cumulative effects? So we've come up with a research methodology and to understand what is cumulative effects for the community. We started with three branches of work. The first is the historical geographic aspect of cumulative effects. We wanted to understand what was happening on the indigenous land. What is the context? How long do you have to go back in time to understand accumulation of industries on the land? So to understand land disposition and entanglement of those industries with occupancy by the Pequagami Nuts, by the people. Another step after that was to do some mapping to understand what is out there now? What are the industries and how are they implemented on the territory? So what are the industries, where are they, and how can we classify them? And then you have to understand that all this context and all this mapping, what we discover with it has an effect on Ilnu Aitun, on the occupancy and on the cultural practices on the land. So with interviews and with elders and guardians on the land, who are associated to familial territories, we were able to discuss cumulative effects and find information and discuss information on in perspective on cumulative effects. So I'll go through those 3 lines of work. The first is about historical geography. My thesis is at the geography department. I myself started as a biologist, went through environmental studies, and at the end decided to go to geography because it was a way of encompassing qualitative and quantitative quite easily, in fact. And historical geography brings perspective to the evolution of land on both sides, on qualitative and quantitative questions. Then, for example, one of the issues that you have when you discuss cumulative effects is, when does accumulation start? When does cumulative effects start to happen? For that region of Canada, for the north coast of Quebec, we know that, and I won't go through all the history because it would be long, but as you may know, settlers came by the St. Lawrence River and settled on the north coast of the St. Lawrence River. And at some point, the Crown, the French and British Crown, took possession of that land and established quite early what we call the King's Domain, Domaine du Roi in French. That domain was mainly based on beaver trapping, beaver economic activities. So it started as, they wanted to do it as an alliance, but it, as you may understand, it didn't being really enacted as an alliance. The Crown, both French and English Crown, British Crown, took over the land quite quickly. But when you're looking at that domain, at that group, at that large territory, you see that the economic development was done only on one industry, which is beaver trapping. Though, further into history, we see that this one industry will stop, and then you will have a tipping point where there's the beginning of diversification of industries based on colonization, formal colonization from the government at that time. So it's really, while analyzing the moment in history where you have that diversification, where you can start to understand that there's an accumulation going on at a certain point in time. So at that point, it's really that the government of what we know as Quebec today wanted to send people up north and started to open that region to agriculture and forestry. At some point, that's what brought the Innu to ask for the protection of some land, which was used in 1856 as the establishment of a part of territory that, as you may understand, shrunk over time. So you can have now different industries that you can see the evolution through time. For example, forestry, which you can have an understanding of going south to north. The touristic industry that came after that, while you have people coming in, the more people want to open the land to tourists. In that case, it will be rich European and American tourists that would be invited, and you would have a privatization of some part of the land based on clubs. And for bringing tourists in, well, you will have to create railroad or roads to bring people from south to north. So, for example, one point of access was from Quebec to the Lac-Saint-Jean region by railroad. Quite quickly, we established roads through Quebec City to Saguenay region, and it continued after that. And then one of the latest appearing industry is hydroelectricity. So hydroelectricity, in fact, in Quebec is almost often based by Hydro-Québec, but in that region, it's mainly been private-owned dams and central by Rio. Well, at that time was only Alcan. Now it's known as being Rio Tinto Alcan. And in fact, there's only one Hydro-Québec dam, which is at the confluence of Péribonka and Manoan River. All the other rivers, all the other central, are in fact been built a long time ago, at the beginning of the 20th century, by Alcan itself. And there's a lot of things to do about how government was or wasn't able to regulate Alcan at that time on building those dams. So this is a way of showing that you can go through time and have an understanding of how the industries came together to accumulate on the land, and see the tipping point on when they started to do it. Some of thing then that you can link to an Indigenous perspective is that cumulative effects for Indigenous nations relate to dispossession by accumulation of their land by the industries. So in all the things that I've mentioned, the industry just came to the land and took the land for granted, and in the way that they can use it. Also, cumulative effects are in continuity with the historical process of land appropriation by industries during colonization. So I've only talked about land and industries, but at the same time, colonization was going on on all other fronts. And also that through time, cultural practices are entangled in disposition and appropriation context. And this is important to mention, because it's not because the industries were coming in and taking over the land that people just stop go on the land or stop to be to associate themselves with that land. At some point, the people started to entangle with the industries and say, well, it provides also opportunity to go on the land, and they would use that as a point of entry to continue and to practice their traditional ways of life. After that, you have well, this is the end for the first stream of work that I've done. The other thing is now more nowadays, what are the industries, what's happening? For the first part, I worked mainly on the old Nitassinan, on the old traditional territory. For this section, I mainly worked on the Péribonka River watershed. Why the Péribonka River watershed is because it's first on the north-south gradient. So it was interesting to see something really straight. And also because it was one of the river in the region that has a lot of has a diversity of industries. So for example, Alcan, Péribonka River was one of the main interests for Alcan for building hydroelectricity dams. So, and also I can mention, with the context provided with historical geography, you can start to understand that these are the industries that through time mean something into the accumulation. So you can select those industries based on what has been happening. And in other contexts, what I say to people around that wants to start to work on cumulative effects is, what are the industries that you have? You see that into that list, I don't have pipelines, for example, but for others, you might have. So doing that mapping, I started to go and I went through Mashteuiatsh data banks, and I just went and rearranged the data provided so we can have an understanding of what has been happening for each industries. These are not great resolutions, I'm sorry for that, but it provides you an idea of what I've been doing. For example, this is synthesized forestry mapping where you can see both non-man-made and man-made impacts from forestry. This one is from villégiature. I thought I had changed this one, which what in their word, this word in French means all that encompass both cottaging and all recreational activities on the land. It really means that you're going to the land only based on the things that you can do there without being part of that land. You're just being a tourist at some point. So you can see that all those points are cottages. So there's a lot of people building cottages on that section of Tasman. In fact, you would see a lot of others on the south here. But you can also see that there's a lot of in the south, but less and less to the north. So when it comes to the cumulative effects of villégiature from recreational tourism in the north, you can have a good understanding of what happens if there's not there, but other industries are. Hydroelectricity, it doesn't look that big, but each of these asterisks are dams and centrals, and you have the creation of few reservoirs. And mining, these are claims, and in fact, there's only one project on the land that won't go forward at this time because in the economic context is not good, which is phosphorus mine in project. And one of my favorite is that map, which is the road map. All those industries are based on the fact that you can have access to the land, and you can see that mainly based on the forestry activities, you will have a lot of little and small roads coming from mainly that red road, which is mainly also built by industries such as forestry, but also for hydroelectricity purposes. Those maps' intent was to go through Mashteuiatsh data banks and see what do you have as information on different industries. And then you can see that, yes, those industries are distinct activities, but they are also having different entities that will make them expressed on the land. So you have for each industry several things, several entities that you have to look, and that might interact with each other and create cumulative effects. So at the end of understanding this, to have an idea of what are the effects or what are the impacts of that, I went through discussing with people that I've seen through time these things happening and accumulating on their land, and to understand what is the effects it had on their practices and the occupancy on the land. I present this to you. Another context, sometime I take more time about this graphic, but it was important for me and for Mashteuiatsh to make sure that while we were discussing cumulative effects, we wouldn't stay at only that stage of what we understand as being indigenous knowledge. And this knowledge is a system. It encompasses more than just factual information or quantitative information, but as a whole is encompassing land and resource management systems, social institutions, and a whole ontological perspective on what it is to be a link to territory. So we were taking in account that fact that while we were discussing cumulative effects, we had to make sure that it was into an understanding of these broader information and broader perspective on cumulative effects than just one-on-one direct effects. While discussing with people, there's two great information that we've seen, great group of information that we've seen. The first, I would say, was the personal influence of cumulative effects, the accumulation of industries on the land. We've seen that people were talking about their occupancy and well-being in the same at the same time, and that they were able to mention that with some interaction of some of the industries, their well-being on the land has changed through time. But it was, sometimes we were looking at precise activities such as trapping, hunting, fishing, and this is valuable. You want to understand on those. But what I've been aware of and what I've seen is people, even if it was people were able to go trapping, hunting, and fishing, the effects of just I'm going to fish, but I'm feeling with there's too much people around. I'm not well on the land. It works something to know. Even if you're able to do something, it doesn't mean that you're doing it and you enjoy it as much as you would like. So that's why the well-being part of that is quite important to understand. After that, there's another set of understanding of knowledge that came from those interviews, which was the fact that people from the history of their family, their own history, but the history of their family, their father and mother, grandmother and grandfather, they had information on how the land evolved, and then they were able to see how it evolved and how each industries interacted with each other to create the current situation, which is important because sometimes you might think of a really technical way of understanding these interactions, but if now you have someone that have seen it and have a strong understanding of what happened when they've seen those interactions at each time. So they've seen two things mainly, succession of industries on a latitudinal gradient, so it's coming from the south and going north mainly. And the last one is one I'm putting emphasis on, that one is the interconnection of all these industries by road construction. This is preliminary data. I have to finish some of the analysis of all of this, but this last one is quite important because it shows that with interviews and a good understanding of historical geography, you can come to a situation where interconnection is seen as where is the threshold, where is the moment in time where we should stop development. And this is one of the reflection that was brought to my attention is you have forestry, which forestry by itself is having its effects, but forestry brings roads, and those roads bring cottages, and those cottages have an effect at themselves. But if you put forestry and roads at the same time, you would have a greater effects than just one or two of these. And that brings me to that kind of indicators of an administrative assessment tool that you can use to say, well, if you have And you understand this is on a cumulative effects perspective. So hydroelectricity has a big effect on its own. But on a cumulative effects perspective, if I have hydroelectricity in the road going to that hydro dam, the cumulative effects by itself, it's quite low. It's only the big impact of hydroelectricity. If I have forestry in roads, I have an indication that I have a potential more stronger cumulative effects. And then if I had forestry, villégiature, which I thought I'd change it again, recreational tourism and roads, at that time, at the same point, maybe you reach a threshold, maybe you have strong cumulative effects, because now you have those street activities where people were saying, well, now I cannot move because there's forestry and there's people, and even if forestry is going out and is not coming back for 20 years, I cannot go back because cottages have taken the place and will empty the river, empty the lake. And now I've been in a situation where, I was talking about specific lakes, people were talking about fishing, and it was clear for me that I shouldn't insist on where was that lake, because it happened once that they've mentioned a lake, and the lake was emptied in the next weeks. So people know how to protect those information, and when you open a new lake for fishing because of forestry, then villégiature is taking the place. The question mark after threshold is important, because what it says is there's such adaptability from people that yes, the well-being is severely attacked, though people will always say, well, I'll find a way of changing, of adapting. So never someone said we have abandoned a site. You don't abandon a site, you always keep it in mind. So give you an idea of how it could be put in the consultation process is, if I'm talking about forestry planning, I could be talking about roads, I could be talking about lakes, I could be talking about the potential of recreation of that place, even if in fact you're in a silo where you're supposed to talk only about forestry. In the cumulative effects perspective, you should also be talking about road constructions and cottaging construction at the same time. I won't take too much time about this slide. I wanted to just show and say that, working in partnership from, it's part of my thesis. It's I'm not an Indigenous person. I'm coming from the university context. We've partnered with Mashteuiatsh based on personal relationships and prior experience together. I have friends in Mashteuiatsh now, how we worked well together, and we had some thinking together on how we managed to work well together. And one of the things is that you firstly have to accept, as someone coming from university, and to be aware coming from university, that we have too much of a prejudice of thinking that university will act as bring knowledge and to community. While you can't, and I've seen it and lived it, community is bringing knowledge to you. Mashteuiatsh contributed to my understanding of issues addressed in community effects in ways that university wouldn't have been able to teach me. And this is what you have also to recognize, is that there's a strong scientific quality of research in communities that we have to acknowledge. And that while we're often talking about traditional knowledge, traditional doesn't mean fixed in time. It means that there is a system, a complex system that has been adapted in that through time, and that indigenous knowledge is contemporary. And then what it left me is that, well, you're working in partnership, each time you have to keep that learning attitude and not start to believe that you understood everything in life. So I wanted to share that because it was a part of our work together to see when you come from university, from the land management office of a council, how do you work well together? So thank you very much. Merci for your attention. And we're ready, I think, Leea and myself, to take a few questions. I don't know if I talk too much, if I took too much time, but.
There is actually a question off the app that I could read out just to get everybody started if you like.
Sure.
So it's how can you integrate Indigenous cumulative effects modeling to land use planning in Indigenous communities? So we can put it out to either one of you who wants to take that question.
Paul-Antoine, I think that's
I can go.
better suited to you.
Well, I can try and answer to that. One point of the questions is modeling. And, you know, one aspect of modeling is that you have a lot of information coming in, and how often is quantitative data. So one point of Indigenous knowledge is that you have quantitative data coming from Indigenous knowledge, but we have to find a way of inputting more qualitative data, more cultural and relevant information into those models, so it gets better and it improves. And there's a way of doing this. The center is thinking about ways of how we could improve that and partner and think about how we can promote the use of it, not the use, but the mobilization of this knowledge into different processes and modeling, for example. I don't know if it answers the question, but I don't know if Leea, you wanted to add something.
Well, we are able to better predict impacts and development when we have this data, and we haven't had a lot of good systems to capture the data. And, you know, some of it is in, you know, our elders and cultural keepers in our communities. And, you know, spending the time to be able to get that knowledge and being able to track it through a period of time, you know, results in better decision making and helps us to protect or develop, show us where to develop. So it's really important to have that mapping to help us to make sustainable choices for our communities.
Great, thank you. If anybody else has any questions, you can either, if you want, to go into the reactions and raise your hand and we can unmute you, or you can go ahead and unmute yourself. There's also the chat box. We can read them out if you would prefer that. Because we still have a few minutes yet, if anybody has any more questions. We can hear clock ticking.
Well, one thing I would just say about is, you know, with land use planning and cumulative, I think they just go hand in hand. When, you know, just as we saw from Paul-Antoine's presentation, you start one development on the land, and then you're maybe create an opportunity for 2 or 3 more spin-offs. And being able to think about what this could lead to is really important as you're designing your land use plan. And, you know, most land use plans are part of a larger community comprehensive plan. So really being able to have this big picture, but the land is tied to, you know, everything that we do and to our culture and to our livelihood. So being, and each time we develop, it opens up the opportunity for more, depending on what kind of planning and policies and regulations we were putting in place.
Awesome, thank you. We have another question coming in on the chat from Nadia. She says, was this project part of your PhD research or work with ICCE? And how can other communities have similar types of research projects?
I feel it's towards me. It was part of my, in fact, of my PhD work. So I've started my PhD work in 2015 at Laval University, and it's been, you know, that partnership that we've called the Tishipiminu Partnership. And now that my thesis is coming to an end, I have more and more to talk about, and I felt it was a good way of showing what can be done and how you can think of cumulative effects on an Indigenous perspective. For doing that kind of research, you have several, you can have different point of entry. Sometimes having that kind of partnership with universities can be a good thing. That's why I've talked about that partnership way of thinking, because sometimes the relationship with university is not straightforward. You have to have quite good boundaries to that kind of partnership, but it's doable. I can also mention that ICE has a community funding program. So that program finished this first round of funding a month ago now. But we'll have this summer another opening on that community funding program that allows some funds to do some work on cumulative effects. I don't know if it would cover all this work that took me 5-6 years to do, but it's probably a good way of starting the work of thinking on how you or your community would like to address cumulative effects. Because one thing that the centers understand is that context varies, changes to the country, and you might want to have your own way of understanding cumulative effects and knowing how you, as a community, want to address cumulative effects. So that's the kind of work you can do. I'm not aware, you know, there's different funding streams that exist, but I wouldn't name all of them. But yes, that would be the best answer I think I can provide on how you can start that research. If you have any project in mind, you can contact the center, and we can discuss it and see who maybe in your area is doing what work, and maybe some of the work has been done in your area. That's a big maybe, because it depends on where you are, but if you want to discuss it, I'll be glad to discuss with you. So.
Yeah, and just to add to it, as Paul-Antoine said, being in contact with, if you're close to a university or a college, there's, you know, so many students who are interested in pursuing on the ground work. And, you know, I think, you know, projects from our communities would be super interesting for them. And so making that link and, you know, seeing if there's people who want to study, because there's support for that kind of work. It's another avenue.
Awesome. She says, great idea. Thank you. So if there isn't any more questions, I want to let everyone know that the presentations that are recorded, as well as the slideshows, will be available on the HOVA app for about 6 more months, as well as they will be uploaded to the links-to-learning.ca website. So you'll be able to access them there as well. And also make sure that you go into the HOVA app and do some meetups, ask any other questions that you can direct message to some of the presenters, and as well go into the surveys and make sure that you give some feedback for any of the sessions that you have attended as well. We do have a couple more minutes if anyone wants to stay a little bit longer and have any other, have any more discussion, or if you have anything else to add, though. I'm not dismissing you at all. So just wanted to make sure I catch that in there, though.
Okay, well, we're really appreciative of the time. It's been a pleasure to be here with you today, and hopefully we'll get to meet you through our website or at an ICE event or, by phone. So Miigwech for the opportunity today. It's been really great.
Yes, thank you so much on behalf of Can-Do. I want to thank you so much for coming. It's been a really interesting, amazing platform to be able to still engage with people over this pandemic and to still have learning opportunities. So if anybody else just wants to, you got some applause, so that's good too. Everyone's enjoying it. I just want to make sure that everyone knows that when you leave here, you can go back into the main session, into the agenda and hit into the lunch session, because there will be a cultural showcase. There'll be some videos, so you can enjoy that while you're enjoying your lunch. And then there's the session again will start at 1 o'clock, or sorry, 1:45 for the next actual workshops. All right.
Okay.
Thank you so much.